Just how were Capitol Police set up to fail on January 6th? Well, Blaze News investigative journalist Steve Baker detailed this in his recent piece for theblaze.com, and he joins us now to discuss it. So, Steve, you've done so much work on this. What's the latest findings for you here with this January 6th case?
Well, the latest is actually yet to be revealed. I'll just say that right now. We have more coming. This story that we were working on, though, and that we just published, is more of an update for the Blaze media, Blaze News consumers who have not been familiar with what I had been working on for the last 3 years. And what we know beyond any shadow of a doubt as it relates to the potential setup or the fact that there was a massive failure related to the police response that day on January 6th, now almost 4 years ago, first of all begins with, and this is very, very significant, is the massive under deployment of the United States Capitol Police on the day. And this is mind-boggling to the officers themselves because, as they will tell you, and we've interviewed many of them, whistleblowers, we've interviewed those who are still with the Capitol Police, officers who have retired, including command level officers, who told us that on the day that they showed up for work, it was just another day at the office. And that's despite the fact that the Capitol Police leadership, specifically the Assistant Police Chief Yogananda Pittman, had issued and signed off on 6 permits for protest on the Capitol property that day, meaning that on a day like that, according to every officer that we've ever talked to with the Capitol Police, is that meant that it was an all boots on the ground day. But it was during the COVID lockdowns, and they had somewhere between 700 and 800 of their uniformed officers on what they called administrative leave that day. They did not bring them in for this special event, which they could have done. They also did not share with the command level officers the intel that was coming in, not only from the United States Capitol Police intel, but from the FBI, from the New York Police Department, from many other agencies that were telling them that there was something up, that they had chatter, that they had intel, that there was going to be violence that day, that there were going to be attacks on the Capitol. Even, now this is most important, even that Congress members themselves were to be targeted that day. This intel was shared with the assistant chief level officers there, and it was not disseminated to the actual frontline officers or the command level officers that would be on the ground that day. So rather than having 2,000 uniformed officers, which they would normally have, at the command of those on the ground that day, they had somewhere in the vicinity of only 200 officers, which was why they had to send up the panic call immediately to the Metropolitan Police to get over there. Thank God they got there when they did. And then in addition to that, obviously, we all know the story about the National Guard being refused, and that began with President Trump's offer, the refusals from the Mayor Bowser, and then, of course, the involvement that happened over at the DOD and their refusal to send over the National Guard after the violence had already begun because they didn't like the optics.
Steve, we've had, of course, through your efforts and Joe's efforts in writing these stories, the former head of the Capitol Police on the show. And it's remarkable to me, as I think is in this article, that some people on the right even would condemn the Capitol Police and say they were somehow part of this, conspiracy or instigated violence. And it seems as if everything you're talking about, the fact that they were made to sign an NDA, they were set up to fail, they weren't given all this information, and even the Life of Harry Dunn, the video that's out now, shows that some of them maybe have been co-opted later on. This is a group of people who didn't initiate anything, and in fact were sacrificial pawns. Is that right?
Yeah, and one of the most egregious narratives that's out there, even from the right, is that the Capitol Police or the Metropolitan Police started the problem. That's not what happened at all. The first 2 breach lines that happened outside at the Capitol were initiated by violent provocateurs. We are yet to determine who specifically that they were working for. We have our ideas, and we're working on that. When Jill asked earlier, "What's the latest?" That's coming. But what we know is that these guys were left flat-footed without any information. They didn't have headgear. They didn't have body armor. They didn't have anything that they needed when this massive crowd started moving over, and then the provocateurs breached the first barricade. The second barricade started attacking the third barricade, and then things started happening. And look, let's be honest, there were some illegal uses of what they call less than lethal armaments against the crowd. Absolutely were used outside of their training, in violation of their training, in response to what was happening. There was panic there. I saw the panic with my own eyes. I was there at 1:19 p.m. on the West Front battle line. The first thing I recorded was injuries. I got up in the Capitol Police officers' faces with my camera, and I recorded the panic. And that's when I first began to realize that these guys were caught flat-footed. Now, that doesn't excuse the leadership that withheld this information. That does not in any way exonerate the leadership who not only withheld this intelligence, but did not hold briefings that morning, as we demonstrated in A Day in the Life of Harry Dunn Part 1, that in fact the normal morning roll call briefings that they would have, they didn't even hold them that day. And we have Capitol Police officers even testifying in the various January 6 trials to that effect, that they showed up to work thinking it was just another normal day, and that they were told nothing in briefings because they didn't have briefings that day.
Steve, we have a lot of topics to go through with you. Before we leave January 6th, though, I just want to give you a chance to tell people a little bit about what's in this new video, which is really the meat of the matter for Officer Harry Dunn, who I just saw on TV today. I mean, he's still campaigning for Biden and spreading disinformation about January 6th. But this is the video that we've been waiting for. So tell people what's in it.
Yeah, this is a really important video because this really cuts to the crux of the matter, especially with the Department of Justice involvement in January 6th. And that boils down to that the Department of Justice, we believe, some member, somebody, somewhere, suborned perjury from not only former officer Harry Dunn, but also Capitol Police Special Agent David Lazarus in their testimonies against the Oath Keepers back in the fall of 2022. And that's what this particular episode, or part 2 of our series, focuses on, are the lies that were constructed, how the two officers not only contradicted each other, but actually neither of their testimonies could in fact be true in any way, shape, or form by the video evidence that we were granted access to in the Capitol CCTV viewing room by Congress. And as a result of that, I just don't believe, Matt, that they ever thought, whether it was the Department of Justice, the Capitol Police, and certainly not these two officers, that somebody like myself would ever get access not only to the video itself, because at the time that these lies were told and that the subornation of perjury took place, the left, the Democrats, controlled Congress and certainly would have never granted access to those videos. But more importantly, we were given permission to use videos that were marked highly sensitive down in the bowels, down in the tunnels of the Capitol, which allowed us to absolutely 100% without any shadow of a doubt identify that Special Agent David Lazarus not only lied in his testimony at the Oath Keepers trial, but he was in a place where he could not have seen what he claimed to have seen 3 or 4 times, and when in fact he was in another building across the street.
All right, Steve, I know you spent a lot of time in Western North Carolina, so let's move on to the Hurricane Helene response, because we have a former Pentagon official, Casey Wardynski, that has told Blaze News that the federal response to Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina, in Tennessee, in Georgia, is pathetic compared to the response in past hurricanes. He also said it was political and it was intended to target the Trump supporter areas. So what is your response when you hear somebody that is a former Pentagon official come out and say these things?
Well, this isn't just some hack former Pentagon official. This is a guy who was 30 years in the Army. The Army sent him while he was still an active duty trooper in the Army. They sent him to get his master's degree at Harvard. He was already a West Point grad. Then they sent him to get his doctorate at Rand. They made him the chief economist of the Pentagon. He's a logistician. After his retirement of 30 years in the Army, he was then later appointed by President Trump in 2019 to be the assistant secretary of the Army over manpower. And he managed an $87 billion budget in that department. And that budget that he managed and that department that he managed was exactly what is not being used in the disaster relief here in North Carolina and the other 6 states that have been affected. As a matter of fact, what we were able to show in this article, as the kids like to say today, we brought the receipts. We were able to show what the federal government, through the request and in partnership with the governors, when they request this aid, were able to supply in places like New Orleans for Katrina, in Houston for their hurricane, in Puerto Rico. And not only that, but all over the world in other disasters, Haiti, their earthquake, in Indonesia from their tsunami. And it massively dwarfs what has been provided here in North Carolina. Literally, the governor of North Carolina last week bragged that they had 3,150 federal boots on the ground, including National Guard units. That's 3,150 when all of these other disasters that I just mentioned range from 15, 17,000, 60,000 federal troops were assisting in those disasters. And we have a paltry 3,000 here. And that's just in North Carolina. But we have 28 counties that have been devastated here in this state. And the geographic size of this disaster dwarfs any of the other ones that I've just mentioned right now. Houston was bad. New Orleans was bad. Obviously, Puerto Rico, Haiti were bad, but the geographic size of this disaster dwarfs those. And because of the complexity and the rugged terrain and the near almost impossibility of getting to people in these mountainous regions, we should have had, and according to former Assistant Secretary of the Army, Casey Wardisky, we had the supplies here. The engineering is there. It's in our backyard. It's literally here, not only in North Carolina, but they have engineering brigades in South Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia that could have had overwhelming support here in North Carolina and had it here immediately, but it's still not here yet. And it's going to be 5 weeks in 2 days. On Thursday, it'll be 5 weeks since this disaster, and they're already pulling some of that 3,150 troops out and sending them home.